Hello. So I want to continue with where my thoughts are taking us. And so right here I have some ideas that I want to go over. And and so it starts out rather structured and somewhat rehearsed. And it's just going to be like the tarmac from which I can take off because I do want to go into the real time sort of like spontaneous mode where I don't know where it's going to take us. And that's the unscripted mode. And the reason why is something to do with discovery. Like with art, um, you traditionally learn how to plan everything, and then you make the finished um, painting or sculpture. Like you look at this, the if you look at more classical works of art, they are like going to have to prepare themselves before they exert all their energy on this giant canvas. Especially if you're doing frescoes, there's no way you can just go ad lib because you can't correct yourself. You can't go back and correct yourself. And like if you look at the sculpture, like the Statue of Liberty, like oops, or like oh, let's change the expression on her face. Well, you have to do that when you're first making, like, say, your clay. But the thing is, artists have also explored other means of creation where it's more like the automatic kind of a thing, and that at the turn of the century, people started getting into that. And although this has nothing to do with what's on the board, but it does in terms of the direction I want to take, because like when you look at art as we approach, I guess the previous century, because this is the 21st century, the 20th century, this whole thing about becoming more fluid and spontaneous, took off. Like with music, with jazz, this whole thing about improvisation took off. And I don't, I'm not a music major, but I think like if you could improvise, like Beethoven was a genius, he can improvise. Mozart was a genius, he can improvise. Where the rest of us are learning how to read sheet music and playing like, like almost like robots, Um, you know, the Beatles really creative, And I talk to real musicians, and I live with a musician, and he's like, "Wow, composing is, like it's like magic. How do you compose? And I wonder if it's something to do with improvisation, And then okay, I improvise, so then now if you can write music, now write the music. You improvise. That sounds cool. So since you know how to write, you can just write it. Well, nowadays it's record. Just when you play your instrument, just go crazy, And you're recording everything, and you can play it back. And say, hey, I like that progression. Then you can compose from that. But people use digital audio anymore, and you can do all sorts of like loops and discover things. But so again, I am going off the rails, and that's a part of this whole thing that I want to do, because this is, my project, and so my style is going to be all over it. And so the main thing is I'm interested in the sort of like free falling kind of a thing, but I think that as I do that, oh, I want to go a little bit here, I want to go a little bit there. I don't want to just hit the wall. So the unscripted part of this will probably take off somewhere. Maybe it already did, because I didn't plan on talking about art or music. But maybe, I don't know, somehow I want to bring it all to that. But right now, I have stuff on the board that I really want to unpack, and I like I say, it's open ended. Like it's not a beginning and end, and this is the conclusion. And I want this to tie in with everything that I record, these ideas. My previous recordings dealt with having a certain kind of an approach. I wrote up here, but I erased it, and it was to be and that was impartial. So bring it back, and how this sort of like frees you up. it frees you up, and that kind of thing. Gives you freedom. And so that's kind of like, I really feel that was, I really wanted to like set the pace for that. So like, there was a time when, if you were to think in an unorthodox manner, you can get in trouble, right? I talked about that with the story of Galileo in the Catholic Church. And so somebody's more impartial than the other. And my whole idea was like maybe Galileo was a little more impartial than the Catholic Church. And yet at the same time, he was trying to say that this is the glory of God, this is, I'm just showing you a more accurate model of what God did. And that's why he's impartial. It wasn't like he was, I want to destroy the Catholic Church. I want to eviscerate and eliminate the what they believe in. So I'm gonna create this model that obviously goes against what it says in the Old Testament about how creation happened, and and so on and so forth. And that's not what he was interested in doing. He was more impartial, and because of that, he was freed up. He had a little bit more freedom of thought, and that's what's important. And I think what's interesting is the same with the art. Like artists like, I don't know, even before Picasso, but like Picasso was a little bit more freed up to do the stuff that he was doing. And what's funny is Jackson Pollock was even more freed to do what he was doing, because with Jackson Pollock's art, there's nothing representational on that picture plane. You see? So it's a progression of this type of, fluidity. And you can even, with the music I was trying to go into a little bit before this, is that with all this digital stuff, you can do whatever you want. And it's like, music theory be damned. It's crazy. It's a crazy time. And I've done it. I paint, and stuff, and I've done abstract stuff, but not before. Before I just didn't get it, Anyways, so I want to go into what I have over here. And so the title of this is, Do Chemicals Give Us Meaning? And I was talking to a friend about hormones and how the hormones like dictate our feelings. And indeed, it's what we need. Hormones are necessary for us to do all our functions. And I was focusing on how it makes us feel. So, like, I know that there's more hormones than this, and I had to look up, like, which does what. And so, like, basically hormones deal with our feelings. It dictates how we feel. In other words, it helps us. Without hormones, you wouldn't be able to experience feeling. And it deals with like mood and stress, the controlling of stress, and hormones go to your different parts of your body so that the body could regulate itself. So you can tell that I'm not like a scientist or a biologist. So I just sort of remember when I'm talking, like I'm trying to show you the bigger picture and stuff like that. And so you could learn too. You can say, okay, well, that's what this means, and look it up and improve my vocabulary. So like I wrote them down. They're regulators. So hormones are regulators, and they for organs, and we also have neurotransmitters. So without hormones, you can't transmit information in your brain. And like the body is sending messages to the brain, you got to have hormones doing that, and the hormones in your brain and stuff like that. So it deals with like growth, regulating your blood, reproduction, your metabolism, where you convert food into energy, so like your thyroid makes some certain hormones and stuff. So again, like I don't have the encyclopedic list of all the hormones and what each one does, but the key ones. So like for instance with oxytocin, It's your love hormone. So without oxytocin, you can't feel love. That's what this hormone does. It dictates how you feel and you know, stuff like that. So like, with oxytocin, you can experience love, and with dopamine, that's like your pleasure hormone. Endorphins, that creates a sense of bonding, and vasopressin, that deals with like your social behavior, and so that somehow is activated. That activates things in you as you're interacting with other people. So you're with a group of people. Somehow that might this cuts in this triggers the vasopressin, you know, social behavior and stuff like that. And estrogen, well, that's, you know, your sex, and deals with deals with that, and even like, you know, bone strength. Again, I had to look that up. I didn't know that like last week. Oh, bone strength is connected to estrogen, you know. So stuff like that, and you know, there's like testosterone and you know, estrogen. You know, the one for the male, one for the female. But like in general, you know, that's what this is for. Estrogen, the sex functionality, you know. So I wanted to like go into this regarding things like feelings of love, and so when you're attracted to somebody, it's because of these bodily functions reduced to like these chemicals, because these are chemicals, and so like chemicals give us meaning. You know, without love, how can you have meaning? You know, so we have that, and so I wanted to get into that. And what's interesting is, you know, there's also some negative connotations. Like, so with oxytocin, you could also experience favoritism. So like with favoritism, you have the inside and the outside group. So the inside group is the group of people or the individual that you favor, and then you have like the outside group, those who are not a part of that inside group. And so with increased love, like you love something so much, you will distort your reality by the negative picture you'll paint of, like, say, somebody you previously loved. You see, you know, if you fall into love, you can fall out of love. And so, and also with this type of favoritism, you can start getting into this realm of the lie. Now you're getting into lying. You see, and this kind of thing is tied in with other things. Like, so you might love somebody because they give you pleasure. So like the oxytocin is your love hormone, but like that's in sync with your dopamine hormone, because this person, you love this person because it really, you know, interacting with this person, it kicks in the pleasure hormone. You know, you increase endorphins, you know. And so like, you know, you see relationships, sometimes they go sour. And like, so you wonder what's going on there, you know, and like with stalking and stuff like that. And so what's going on there? So how could somebody get so obsessed with somebody else if the dopamine hormone is never being activated? So somehow the pleasure thing has to be a factor, because what happens when somebody's stalking somebody else? They become like mad. They're going mad. Because the other things with increased dopamine stimulation, like we're talking like, you know, abnormal levels, you know, schizophrenia and madness can result. So that's what's going on here. And so you tie that in with this whole thing about lying, you know, so, and so if the oxytocin thing is like, you know, if it's increased repetitively, and so love, you know, is like, it becomes, you know, if it's tied in with the dopamine, could that mean you're becoming addicted to it? Because I do want to get into addiction, and I don't, you know, addiction. So like, if you overstimulate, your hormones, it will create an addiction. And like, I had a brother who diagnosed himself an addict. I'm an addict. He had to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and stuff. So like with alcohol consumption, you're activating some of these hormones. You become addicted. And so I'm focusing on the big one of love. Like, so love, the love hormone, oxytocin, and the pleasure hormone, dopamine. But then there's this other one, the endorphins. You have dopamine and so oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins. So that's like your bonding. So that creates like this sort of like bonding. I bond with the partner, and that's where you have your marriages and stuff like that. And that's probably why like the human species definitely started to say, hey, let's get married. Like, remember, like some of our ideas where like if you look in the history of people, like societies, and that marriage, I don't think marriage was a thing since the beginning of our species. Like, we were here for like 500,000 years or something like that. It might have not developed until later. And so like the reason being maybe like it's because of Yahweh, it's because of the patriarchal religion, and I try to use this impartial way of looking at things and just seeing the evidence. But if I'm given more evidence, it can contradict what I was thinking. Like, one of the ideas I was thinking about how marriage happens, is like it has to tie in with the functionality of the group in a society. And so like the idea that you have a female and she gets to have like X number of partners, because she is the principle of creation. Like, she's like the earth. Mysteriously, she can give birth to new life. So it makes sense to go to her and impregnate her, But the problem with that is, what if you're not like in a plentiful environment? What if there's like people dying out, dropping like flies because of like, say, a drought, like in the Middle East, right? And by this time you have like your patriarchal religion, and you have like the patriarch is male, and so like the men is more like on top of things, So it's like, and it sort of makes sense in terms of surviving of a society of a the group, because like, how many times can a woman give birth within like 9 to 12 months? And it's like, well, once a woman's impregnated, you can't impregnate her again to push out babies. You have to wait 9 months. And so if you round it off, it's like, well, maybe a woman can only give birth once a year. But a man could impregnate, multiple females and have multiple babies popping out of the oven. So then you have like, so and so the thing is, with your hormones, with the male, and I don't have testosterone. Like, these things probably kick in. You have the testosterone, you have the oxytocin, you have the dopamine, and like, make no mistake, men enjoy, sex, and yeah, sure, women do too. But being a guy, I can verify, yeah, it's like this, it can really, grab you, and the art shows this, the music, he's, it's all over, right? So like with men, they can become over possessive, and the reason being, it goes down to, I think, two things: the hormones, and then the overstimulation of the hormones you become like schizophrenic or mad, and then so now you have like, I'm going to make a chastity belt for you, woman, and like those kings, and lock her in her chamber, that's that, and unbeknownst to the king, this is what's going on, right? So I'm looking at it with an impartial, type of stance. Like you're reducing life to a bunch of chemicals. Well, for this discussion, maybe I am, and so be it. So and like I don't know where it's going to go. Let's see where it's going to go. So you can have crime. Your crimes of passion. Crimes of passion. Why? Because I would submit because you're activating the love hormone to a point where you get this favoritism happening in the lie, and you lying against the outside group, and it can get so bad that you are mad, and I think that you can be temporarily mad. Because why else would you kill somebody in a crime of passion? It's these chemicals. So what I'm trying to say is maybe you're being dictated by these chemical processes in your body, including your mind, your brain. And so I don't know. I don't think I always knew this. When did I start knowing this? When I was 12, I don't think I knew any of this. When I was 13, 14, 15, it's hard to go back and say, okay, now I know. And I don't know, how many people actually know this stuff, about how your functionality is reduced to these hormones, and so yeah, we could also see how that works with the group, the bonding of a social order, and so. With these things going on in a society, how does this dictate what kind of religion will flourish and which kind of religion will be, pushed to the margin? It has to somehow tie in with individual people and the group. And it's tying in just with the activation or the stimulation of these hormones. You stimulate these hormones and these things take off. Like for me, I remember I saw somebody, I never met this person that came into my life, and it made me feel a certain way. Well, guess what? That's the oxytocin levels. It's popped in. But I mean, somebody else comes around, and I don't feel that oxytocin thing going on there. But this particular individual, the oxytocin is like whoop whoop whoop, right? And you can get it on. You hook up with this individual, and then the pleasure starts coming in, physical and stuff like that. And then you get this bond happening between the two. And if you're lucky, hey, you get married. I know people got married and they're still happily married, more or less. And so the marriage thing, I think that because I read enough literature, I learned marriage came a little bit later with with our mode of life, it didn't marriage was not there from the beginning. There might have been certain individuals where okay, this person's mine, and so on and so on, and I know that with certain primates, you have the alpha male, and they get to choose of the pick, and they have bond, and they do bond, and there's a thing going on there, but when it comes to us. It's we're possessive, and I'm pretty sure there's again, this is where I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure that there are other animals and insects where maybe it's just that's it, that's you mate one time, you have kids, and you die, that's that kind of a thing. So I don't know, but I don't, for what I'm talking about here, I don't have to know. I don't have to know that, but with people. I think that marriage came a little bit later, and I think it ties in with this because of what happens is jealousy, and I think men are probably more jealous than women, probably because of your testosterone, and so stuff like that all kicks in, you see, and so. Well, anyways, so with this kind of a scenario happening in the background of our lives, I mean, this dictates like who and what we are, like what we're doing. These hormones are dictating that. And this tells you something about our brain. And so if you look at your brain, it's pretty much functioning via chemical type of activity in your brain with neurotransmitters and the neurochemistry thereof and the hormones. And so like basically the brain is reliant on chemicals. Like so without chemical processes, your brain cannot function. It's just like dead meat. And so this is where it's tying in with, you know, chemicals giving you meaning. And if you're religious, this is the thing, you know, religious people just don't like this stuff. It's like, well, you're reducing my life to, you know, like I remember when I was a Christian too, you know, you learn about evolution. You say, well, then that means the processes of your brain is all random. So how can I trust your thoughts if it's all random? And well, that's a very interesting thing. But the argument tends to fall flat because you're saying that because you don't know what caused these chemicals to fall into place, including what's going on in your brain, unless you subscribe it to a, you know, something written in a holy text, that renders everything meaningless on its own. And so if it's meaningless and it's random, then you can't trust it. And so the problem with this argument is, why does life have to have a meaning? Why must you ascribe it a meaning? Does it create this sense of does it help the endorphins? And does it increase the, you know, vasopressin? And I would think that maybe that's what's going on. Like, so if you take a group of people living in a society like a city, and somehow and they're religious, they're super religious and all that, and you can measure their hormonal activity, would the hormonal activity of certain hormones here, like the one for bonding and one for love, social behavior, and also control. I think testosterone ties in with control. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong about that. So like, is that more, you know, highly active? If you're to measure this in a given city or society or country where they're super religious. Now you take like a society where they're completely irreligious, and what do you have in terms of what's going on with those hormones? And what's more interesting is what I've learned is that it was because of religion that we formed our societies. So somehow, and I guarantee you that means that these hormones had to have been certain hormones had to have been activated. So far, it's like, yeah, chemicals are giving us meaning. But somehow it got into this dimension of having to be concrete and literal. And you have to have a meaning. You have to have a meaning ascribed to it. And the only way you can prescribe a meaning to something is if it was created by a god. So if this thing was not created by a god and yet it still exists, that's like a problem for certain thinkers. And I think that's a problem. And I think that reality, like I say, now I'm kind of going to the unscripted territory here. Like you take words like reality. Is that the same as existence? and life. Now, how do these words differ, and how are they the same? And again, this part is unscripted. Like, so reality can only be determined by what we see, right? That the whole scope of reality can only be what you can register, what you can perceive, and make sense of. So is our sense of reality the same with total existence of what involves or entails everything? Then how does life tie in with it? And so was life there from the beginning? And so religious people would like to think that, from life, you can only get life from life. And so that's the whole argument that religious people have, because they, God is life. So it's like you can only have life from life. Life cannot come from non-life. So that's like the whole argument about, you have like biogenesis, genesis. They have abiogenesis. So the biogenesis is where things, are creating from something biological or from something alive. And so abiogenesis is when there is no life. And so the theory of evolution talks about how abiogenesis resulted to the biogenetic, type of functionality of reproduction, and from the simple organism to the complex. And so, again, who is being impartial and who is not? If it's like, I could, I've taken some classes in science and a couple of classes in anthropology, and I've read some books, and I've watched a lot of videos with the internet, with YouTube and all that. And it's like, I don't mind that maybe from the abiogenesis, chemical, occurrences of things going on in the primordial soup. Like, what was this planet like before any form of life? And you probably imagine that there's chemicals and heat and cold and molten lava and these chemicals, probably smelled like sulfur and other noxious kind of kind of thing. And but like you go to a marsh, you ever smell like it's like it's all slimy, it smells bad, imagine that, but with a lot of heat, and all these chemicals, like a stew, and then you have lightning, with Frankenstein. Mary Shelley wrote the book Frankenstein. I think it's considered the first book of science fiction, where like this Dr. Frankenstein was taking different parts of cadavers, and he made this Frankenstein monster, but he had to use electricity to start this process. And I guarantee you, she didn't know about the theory of evolution. Nobody did. And so like this very idea. So the thing is, it ties in with again, I don't know I don't know the individual, but I think individuals were responsible for researching how lightning somehow helped create maybe the first amino acids in this soup of chemicals. And so, make no mistake, right? So it's like, okay, again, you can look it up on your own. So, this whole thing about biogenesis, brings us to life. And so life that we are aware of, roughly started happening like 4.5 billion years ago or something like that. But the universe is over 13 billion years old. And this ties in with I want to get into this. So you have the singularity. There's a big bang, and entropy. So the second law of thermodynamics deals with how entropy is. Entropy is it's order to disorder. That's what entropy is. And so, like with the Big Bang, like they believe that the original thing before it, so like what happens is like, so you have like just a singularity, and I'm going to go like that. You see that right there? So this is high, this is low entropy, and this is gradually becoming high entropy over time. So this is like present, and this is like 13 point whatever billion years ago. So no matter what, as you progress in time, the entropy is increasing. And it turns out that life creates entropy. And this is something that's, I couldn't understand it at first, and I still kind of don't understand it. But what happens is life is creating entropy. So like, let's continue. So I have it here, life dissipates. So yeah, life dissipates energy. And so if life dissipates energy, and so how it does it is it transforms energy. It takes something here and it transforms it into something here within our bodies. And what's interesting is we're doing that with our environment. We take the natural resources of the environment and we create, our cities. And so this whole thing about fracking in this country, as opposed to going to somewhere else to get the oil, we convert that petroleum, that oil into energy. You release the energy of the molecules in that stuff, and you create energy. It's by the releasing of something to create the energy. You have to always release, and so one of the things is, then you're creating entropy to release it. Yes, it's a form of, and it goes into this other thing, destruction. Isn't that somehow related to the second law of thermodynamics? Isn't that related to entropy? Right? And so you have this thing where you got to have that to happen to release, to transform energy. And that's what life is doing across the board, inside our bodies and in our environment. Right? It's, again, I'm looking at it from like the artist's point of view, the Roman, I forget the name of the Roman poet that Giordano Bruno, got off on. And so I'm always going back to that, like being able to speculate. I'm trying to be impartial, to be, free to think and see where it goes. So, these endorphins, this is endorphins. Endorphins. It turns out that, maybe not endorphins, but I have to look up every single hormone and see what's happening, because this is what's going to be interesting. It turns out that these hormones, we have hormones that regulate our life, our existence and our moods and the bodily functions and all that, even our, bone density in our blood and for reproduction and all these things. And even, to love and to hate. It's all chemicals, all chemically stimulated things going on. And so I wanted to, before I get into here, I wanted to talk about addiction. And so addiction. So what is addiction? And I was curious about this because I had family members who were addicted. And I think I've experienced, feelings of addiction. I experienced addiction. And so what is addiction? And so it has to be with an overstimulation of hormones. It has to be, from what I'm learning about the science. And so when you overstimulate like dopamine, that's the drugs. It turns out that drugs will stimulate certain hormones. And so it's kind of easy to figure it out. Like, okay, anything with pleasure, and that's going to be, And it turns out that I think there's like ecstasy that might turn on your feeling of bond, of like you feel a sense of bonding, and maybe even love. I have to look at it's very specific. The science says, okay, if you're on like ecstasy, boom, these certain hormones are going to be activated. And so, just as a springboard for that kind of exploring, like what exactly is happening with what particular hormone. And so I'm kind of like paint this broader picture, but it turns out that how do you become addicted is through the overstimulation of certain hormones. And this is, something that we would have to agree on. So that's what addiction is. And so some kind of a hijacking, the word I looked at the definition of addiction and the hormones, and it's something to do with hijacking. And so now you just want to, get the stimulation for the pleasure hormone over, and like, so, and the problem with that is like, if you, after a while, it becomes like, well, I don't get that feeling anymore. I've maxed it out. I can't get the same, like, it's not like the first time anymore. And so I think that ties in with addiction. It all ties, and you get really effed up when you're addicted. You can't break out of that prison. And like things like heroin and alcohol, it becomes habit forming, and your body just can't stop, right? But it has to do with these hormones, and that's what creates the habit forming thing where you go back to it. Well, it turns out like so, but the thing is, I looked it up too. It's like, is addiction, like what is addiction? And so it's the overstimulation of these hormones. But what's tricky is, there's a funny thing about addiction, that it's defined as a type of drive, like you are driven to use these things. You're driven to do these things. And, you'll get up in the morning, and you'll be like, okay, I got to find my fix. And everything that you do will be dedicated to getting your fix of your heroin, getting your smack, I'm 62, so I know more stories about heroin addiction than, some of the more modern drugs, so like, and it's really nasty, but they say it's harder to kick the smoking habit than it is the needle for some reason. But the heroin is a lot more damaging to you in a shorter period of time than like smoking. So like addiction is the overstimulation of these hormones in question, and it's habit forming, and you just, so, and you have withdrawals if you don't get these things. I like to research that more, like what are the physiological occurrences of somebody going through withdrawals. And so I didn't script that out. I didn't research that. I just know that they exist. If you stop drinking coffee, you might have like a headache. If you drink coffee every day and then you stop, you might get a little headache. So I want to know more about that. This is something I can look at on another occasion. But for now, addiction is caused by the overstimulation of certain hormones. And so I was like, well, I'm kind of curious about these hormones and about life in general. And so I want to go there now. And so I researched it, and it turns out that animals, insects, and plants have hormones. And it turns out that we are animals. I mean, I believe that we are animals. And so you throw us into the animal category, warm-blooded, kind of thing. And so like, we're the great apes. We're among those apes, and the hominid line from, we are related to that. And our closest non-human relative is a chimp / bonobo, that kind of thing. So they have hormones. And they have like oxytocin and dopamine and endorphins and stuff. And so now when you look at a chimpanzee mother, holding a baby chimp, it's like, that somehow this is being activated. The same chemical. And it turns out insects have hormones. Like now, it's not like they only have what we have and vice versa. Like there's certain hormones that like promote, like you need to have so you can molt, like you can shed, molt, and like transform from like one thing to another thing, like, the chrysalis stage, that's because of hormones. That's how butterflies are formed, from the caterpillar to the chrysalis to the butterflies, because of hormones. But it's not the ones that we have. We don't have those hormones. I don't know what they are, but, they're, So you have plants and humans. All these things, animals, plants, and animals, insects, and plants, and humans. Well, we're animals, so it's like, three things: animals, insects, and plants have hormones, and they all somehow share the commonality of some of these hormones. And there's other hormones. Maybe I'll look into that, like how many hormones exist per se. A lot more than what I have here, but these are like, there it is. So where am I going to go with this? Oh, I want to continue with addiction a little bit. Can non-human organisms be addicted? Can animals get addicted? It turns out that yes, some animals can become addicted. So I had to write it down. It's like humans can experience addiction. Rats, they've done experiments with rats, and what they do is they attach something to their brain, and so when the rat presses a button and it activates the pleasure center of the brain, that thing will do that until it starves to death. Think about that. It's a very powerful experiment. It's disgusting to do that to an animal, but we learn. It's like, wow. It just, it'll just keep on going. Dolphins. This is something that's fascinating. So there's these pufferfish that when you take them and you squeeze them, you break them open or you squeeze them, they release. Or if you maybe the pufferfish, you grab a pufferfish and in its defense it'll release a chemical, and so the chemical will get you high. Well, at least the dolphins. So dolphins will grab it. They probably started wanting to eat the pufferfish. But it turns out that dolphins they're like, wait a minute. Like, they found out that if they were to grab a pufferfish, the pufferfish releases a chemical and it gets them high. And they become addicted to it. So there's videos of dolphins passing this orb, this pufferfish orb, to other, it's kind of like Woody Allen, the sleeper. So in a way, these dolphins are like that. They're passing this pufferfish to one another and they get high. And that's a form of addiction. Dolphins. Fruit flies, addicted to alcohol. And it turns out that chimps, they have a low concentration of intoxication for for most of their lives because they're eating this fruit. And the fruit is fermented. And so they're a little bit drunk. And so it probably kicks in some of these hormones that without that, they might not be happy. They don't like what's going on, I wonder. So here's the thing. Again, this is my unscripted mode right now. So you could look it up. You Google chimpanzee owner killed by chimp. There's an incident where this woman got her face ripped off by her pet chimpanzee. And there's other instances where they do this. And so now, just today, because this happened, they're aggressive. They can, I'm thinking, what if you incorporated in their diet, and you never took them off it, a certain amount of alcohol? They always have to be a little bit drunk, just a little bit. Would that have stopped some of these violent outbursts of these chimps from happening? Because they get neurotic. And they, oh my God, this is a monster now. Well, why did it do that? Well, if everything's based on the chemicals of our brain and in our body, that's directed, by these hormones, how could you somehow intervene to affect, a population, if not just an individual, And so in this case, a chimpanzee. Because I've seen documentation I've seen documentation on that where chimps, it seems like they're in the wild they're eating a certain amount of fruit, and what if they have no fruit? Maybe they're more aggressive. Sometimes they resort to killing monkeys and are eating these monkeys. They become carnivorous. That could be because they need to get that animal protein, but But also, I don't know. I mean, I'm probably running off the rails here. But anyways, chimps, they've been finding out that the fermented fruit, it keeps them drunk a little bit. So ants, they get addicted to morphine. So this is just the ones that I found today. There's probably a lot of more examples. And plants, I bet if anybody, like you look it up, can plants become addicted? There's probably going to be an example where, yes, you're going to get an example that certain plants become addicted. And so addiction, addiction, what is addiction? It's like the drive to do something. Like if you're addicted to, like, I think you can get addicted to pot. Like, let's say you smoke a lot of grass and then you don't get it. I don't know if you're going to start, killing people or anything like that, but you might be depressed, and you might but the thing is, you'll probably find a way to get it. And so you'll be motivated to get it that day. I'm going to get some weed. I have to get that weed, But it's not the same kind of addiction as it is if you are, an alcoholic. Alcoholic has to drink or else they Again, I like to research addiction more. Like, so what happens to an alcoholic? What happens to an alcoholic, biologically speaking, and psychologically as well, when they are, going through withdrawal. And again, like with the heroin, I've seen films and stuff. It's just amazing what you go through. And I think there was this writer, William S. Burroughs. He wrote a book called Junkie. I read it, and it's just amazing. And so these people who are junkies, like their whole life is getting their heroin and getting off of heroin, and then going back to getting heroin, and then kicking the habit again, and then going back to it. So that's the whole cycle of being a junkie. Like you're addicted to the needle. You're a heroin junkie. You're a junkie, and then you have to detox. It's a process, only to get back to becoming an addict again. And my theory about that is because it's nothing like the first time. I mean, I remember smoking pot when I was a kid, when I was a teenager with a friend. The very first time, the very first time that I got an effect from it was me and Jeff Hatfield. We were laughing like a couple of hyenas. Everything was distorted, and we were just laughing, and time seemed to have been distorted. We were just laughing like a couple of hyenas. It was hilarious. But then later on, by the next year we're smoking it, that feeling is gone. You're not laughing anymore, and that's why people say that marijuana can become a gateway drug. So, anyways, but what I'm saying is, but what if you were to stop pot smoking for a long time and you go back? Maybe you would laugh again. Try it. Okay, because if you overstimulate your body, it's like you build up an immunity. So and that's another thing is what's that all about? How does that tie with the hormones? You see, I don't know this stuff. I just know the basics, but I'm trying to take off from that. So, anyways, let's get back on track here. So, addiction. I started to look into addiction and how it ties in with a drive. And believe me, you are driven. And you become really narrow-minded. I don't care how I get it, but I have to get my next fix of heroin. I have to get, that's it. And also with the sex thing, so somebody becomes obsessed with somebody else. And I think it's because of these hormones are being overstimulated. So I think that you can become an addict when it comes to love, because you're activating the oxytocin, the dopamine, the endorphins, and these other ones, estrogen and that. All these things are being in consort, and they create this clusterfuck, and so it becomes a monster because you're overstimulating it. And so with the so there's the normal type of these hormones are there for a reason. And so especially the mood the ones that regulate our moods and indeed determine them. So it's with with dopamine, well, let's look at the oxytocin. You have love. Okay, love. So I'm reducing love to like a chemical. And in this discussion, that's what I'm doing. And so, but overstimulation of that, you create the sense of, like you maybe you get like favoritism, like you favor this over that, and so you have the in group versus the out group, and then so that becomes even more of a problem if you overstimulate it. Now you're willing to lie. Can you lie to yourself? And I would say yes. So if you're overstimulated, you can even lie to yourself because you favor this time with this individual. What if the other individual wants to break off the relationship? He or she is scared of the other person. I kind of want to, let's just be friends. But this person is so addicted to the overstimulation of oxytocin and, I submit, dopamine. And so, and there's that, you could probably get addicted to the endorphin of bonding and stuff like that. So what happens is you become schizophrenic, you become mad, and you start stalking your partner. Now you have to get a restraining order. And if that don't work, you can wind up having a crime of passion on your hands. Now you have like Columbo asking you all these questions. One more thing, it's like, oh geez, give it up. So it ties in with addiction and drive. And so I was looking at like what can and so like if you try to you can't trick if you ask like AI assist, you can't. I'm not going to be able to trick it into saying that you have to be addicted in order to live. But I'm kind of a twisted individual, and I kind of wonder if you have to have a certain amount of a drive just to continue to live. And so you have to have an affinity towards things. Like, oh, I live because of this person. She makes me want to live another day. And everything is wrapped around that person. When does it become a drive for a good cause, which is to live, to becoming an addiction? It's the same with anything. Like let's say you run a business, and you love your business and it gives you purpose, But what if you become like, you're late at, wow, you're still at the office, you're not at home with the family, And it turns out that you're not having a love affair with no, none of that. You're just, somehow you just got to make more money. It has to be kicking in some of these endorphins. I mean, like these hormones, endorphins, bonding. You bond with the money. I don't know. So it kicks in. I want to look that up later. But like you kick in, you overstimulate some of these hormones because of the money you're making. Right? It has to, because I'm reducing everything to chemicals. The chemicals of the brain. And our chemicals are what define us. It's crazy, no? So, like, and if all of life has hormones, how can you dispute this? And then so I'm looking at like, okay, wow. So what is the function of life? What is going on? Like, and so if these hormones didn't exist, you cannot have life as we know it. And so, like, I don't know if does a bacteria have hormones? So again, you got to take all this with a grain of salt. But I'm talking about as things get going to multicellular organisms. But plants have hormones. Well, plants are multicellular. So the question you can ask is, in another video, I can do single cellular organisms have hormones. So I don't know. I'm not going to postulate that I know. I'm not going to theorize even. I'm just going to look it up, But for this, it seems like multicellular organisms, they have hormones. Animals, insects, and plants. And we're animals, so we're just in that category. So, and then, like, so this thing about I think that there's a fine line between addiction and the drive to life. Like, so, and I looked it up. I said, must you have a drive? Must life have some kind of a drive in order to continue? And I used AI assists, and it said yes, and it went blah 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 blah. And so it's like, and it makes, well, it's common sense. I could have answered that myself. And you know, like, so you got to have a certain kind of a drive in order to live. And so with these hormones and stuff, that's why, you know, like, how did sex come to be? And there is pleasure that is to be had when, like, you ever hear two cats having sex? They sound like babies, screaming, crying babies in pain, but they're just cats having sex. And I'm not going to try to impersonate, you know. So that's because they have hormones, and they have the dopamine one definitely going, and probably the oxytocin, of course, and stuff like that. So there might be a fine line between drive and addiction when you're looking at the whole picture of life itself. So I wanted to go there, and so what? Now look at somebody like a dictator. How are their hormones activated any different than somebody who is not a dictator? You have an average guy who has a wife and 3 kids, a dog, and they run a grocery store. There's no criminal record or anything. Then you have someone like Adolf Hitler. Wouldn't you think that, chemically speaking, there's something different between these two individuals? I would have to say yeah. And somehow the hormones must be kicking in to overload. Because it turns out that I think we know for a fact that Hitler and some of those other people there in the Nazi Party, they're all doped up. They're on meth, they're on speed, they were on pills, they were effed up. Like, it makes sense, right? And so addiction. And then, okay, this is going to be kind of weird, you know, some of you getting offended. Remember when Elon Musk did this, right? He did the, you know, and like, oh, it's a Nazi salute, Okay, but okay, hold that thought. What I just said about the Nazi Party, and this is a fact. They were high on drugs. They were doped up on major drugs. They were addicted. They had the drive. They had the drive to go into Poland on September 1st, right? Let's attack Poland, man. You know, I think it was in 1939. You had the drive to do that. And the whole Nazi regime, they were driven. Like, you know, like, see? Yeah. They were doped up. Well, Elon Musk, he admitted that he was on drugs, including ketamine. He said ketamine, but I think it was on other things too. You know, like speed and shit. High performance individuals in Wall Street, running these big companies, politicians, they're working all the time. Like, I'm 62, and I don't do, like, that stuff, all right? I mean, I'm drinking coffee. Okay, there you go. Maybe it's because it gives me energy. But as you get older, your body is not breaking up, like it deals with metabolism in your thyroid. Your body is not efficiently breaking up the food to releasing the energy. You have ADP, those are the energy releasing mechanism. And every cell, to create the building blocks of life, amino acids, you breathing, all that is tied in with the engine. It's like an engine. And it runs on fuel, but the ATP and all that, it needs to be efficiently extracting and releasing the energy from this food stuff. But as you get older, it's not as efficient in doing that. And so you're tired all the time. So this is another thing I was, you know, like I'm gaining weight, like I'm like 40 pounds or whatever more. I'm like 50 pounds overweight probably, you know? And I'm like, I don't eat all the time. I don't graze all the time. And I'm like, it's hereditary. Well, what? No one's ever said anything about maybe it's because of your metabolism. Something is going on to where you cannot break down the food as good as you used to get the maximum amount of energy like you could when you were at 15 or 20 or even 30. No one's mentioned it to me. My doctors don't ever talk about that. I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm not a specialist, but I'm just saying So I think that this is like the free thought, just trying to be impartial. Just like, yeah, I'm admitting that I'm getting overweight, but okay, what if it's because I have to eat more? Like, so I get this much energy from the food that I'm eating. I get this much energy from this much material mass of food. But as I get older, what if I'm only getting this much energy from this? So I eat more food, right? And it's all based on how the hormones are now, working. And I feel hungry. I have to eat. Because the body is saying you got to eat. I don't think because I'm addicted to pleasure of eating. I think because the body is telling you have to be hungry. Why? Because, look, I got like this blubber here. No, because you don't have enough energy. Why? Because of the ATP, the machine of taking in every cell the food and breaking it into like energy is not as efficient. Is it backed up or what? I don't know, but I don't think that I'm getting as much. A lot of people get like this is because they're not burning the fuel. They're not accessing the energy that's latent in the material of the food, the matter, the food stuff. And so then this stuff kicks in. So the hunger, there's got to be like chemicals that tell the body that you're hungry. And I guess what? I bet they're hormones. Something to look into in the future. So anyways, I'm like going on and going on. I'm still not done yet. This is over an hour, 6 minutes right now. But so I started thinking about, okay, these are examples of life. And life dissipates energy by transforming it to create entropy. That's what life is doing. Life is creating entropy. Disorder from order. So where can we go with that? And I wanted to, I'm still on this whole idea about how, we're not separate from the rest of the world, and then in a sense we are the world. And so I wanted to think about how life itself is a part of this world. And indeed, it's called the biosphere. And that's the part of the spherical formation of the planet that contains life. It includes the air, too, because of birds and other flying things, and the ocean, and the land, of course, terraform. We have the sky and the oceans, but that's like a thin layer around the whole planet, the biosphere. Something's going on with that biosphere if you look at it from a distance. So let's imagine that the biosphere is just an organism. It's just one thing. It's one thing. And we're a part of this bigger organism. And so now this is interesting. According to this stuff here about entropy, you got to take something and you have to break it open to release the energy. And so you release the energy and by transforming it, and that creates entropy. And so it's always an increase of entropy, not a decrease of entropy. I just was watching a teacher today, and he's talking about how from the beginning of the Big Bang onward, you have entropy always increasing. They don't understand. They don't see it anywhere in the universe how there is an example of a reduction of entropy. Now you could say, what about dry ice? What about free? So the releasing of energy is something to do with heat. You're always releasing heat, releasing energy. And so what about something that is so cold? They say that, yeah, but they can never bring it to zero. Now, this is something I want to research. And I know that they were making superconductors in a very cold environment where the entropy is close to zero. But there's nothing naturally that goes to zero. We're the only ones that can think in the abstract, and which is interesting because when you're able to think, our metaconscious awareness where you put yourself in the story, we can come up with these narratives wow, we come up with a model of reality and say, okay, how can, there's no example of a reduction of entropy. So we can think about it, but we don't have any mechanism that actually does that. Like they don't know, they don't see it in nature. So again, I'm going to research this. Like, is somebody, like again, they use like really, really cold, like, okay, something has to be super cold to create superconductors. So isn't that like a reduction of entropy? And so, but I would say I don't think so. I don't think that we know of any example of reducing entropy. Like, so it's always going to be, but they're not stopping it. It's still entropy. Entropy is there. And so this biosphere is releasing energy. And so it's attracted to the idea of, it's attracted to energy, like plants do photosynthesis and they create energy from the sun. They create themselves from the sun, light from the sun. But like they still release it as well. You have, carbon dioxide. So we're always releasing. And so life, if you look it up, and again, it's not like I try to use common sense to understand this, but like, so if you look it up, life is transforming energy. It ain't creating energy, it's transforming it. It's always releasing it from a higher form of energy to a lower form of energy. That's what this biosphere is doing. So, but what did we learn about, like, say, destruction? Destruction creates. Destruction is a form of creating. So when you destroy an order, you can create a new order. And I think that's the ticket right there. So, like, when you had the French Revolution, they destroyed an existing order, the monarchy, to create a new order. And, like, more secular. And the United States, we had our own revolution against the crown, and then we created a whole new system. We created a whole new form of government. You have the 3 branches of government. And so that was like the whole checks and balances. You have the executive branch, executive branch, legislative branch, and the judicial. And so like they kind of, like these 3 things kind of keep each other in check. And so this is something that was like unprecedented before, where you had like, kings and stuff like that. And so, again, I like to tie it back to the Greeks. I think they're the greatest civilization ever. It's something that would be fun to look at. But, so this biosphere from which, we come and, this is dissipating of light, dissipating of energy. But, so it's a form of destruction, right? And we've already seen it, like, like you see it to destroy in order to create, right? And artists, know about this, and, chemists know about this, cosmology scientists, they all know about this. And so, like, the sun is always, like, releasing its heat, its energy, and its light. That's entropy. So that's destruction in a sense. It's disorder, because destruction is also disorder, to create the life on this planet, because without the sun, we wouldn't be able to live. So there you have this entropy of the sun to give us life. So they have plants, heliotrope, facing the sun. I know where the sun is. So that's so here it is. And so nature itself explodes and destroys and shifts and changes. You have the volcanic, sort of destruction. You have forest fires. That's a form of destruction. That's entropy. You're releasing the energy, right? Earthquakes, all these things. And then so what happens is, that's how you create new systems of order and also life, right? So from the destruction, you get the creation. So if you look at, instead of looking at, like, say, Putin or Donald Trump or, Maduro or whoever, and individual people, look at, we're all part, and humans versus, like, chimps. No, look at it as one big organic thing, the biosphere. And I call it the organism, And so, like, this thing has to... So, and it seems to be like, I think that we learn from nature. Everything we learn from nature. We learned, if you look at stealing, did we invent stealing? No, nature steals from itself. in order to create more life, you know. You every time you go and you have a lizard going to a bird's nest and taking the egg, there it is. That's stealing, right? And I don't want to, there's a lot of other examples too, but that's the most obvious one. So you can eat, you're stealing somebody else's life when you kill it to eat it, are you not? I mean, that's the biggest theft that you can think of. Think about it. Like, okay, you could steal my electric piano, or you can take my computer, or take my paintings I paint, or you can take my life, or take my wallet. Like you're held up at a gas station. Like, okay, well, just take my wallet, take my credit card, take my money, or take my life, right? So, like, the bigger theft would be taking of somebody's life, would it not? Like, you're stealing from me. You're taking something from me that gives me life, like the money in my wallet will give me life. The car gives me life because I used to go from A to B. And my music gives me life because it makes me happy, It's increased, it stimulates some of these, chemicals, right? That's what art does. I looked it up. Art does stimulate the stimulation of certain hormones, in the making of art. It's all connected. It all reduces to these chemicals. So it's like the biggest theft that I can think of is stealing somebody's life. So nature does it everywhere. Again, life is a dissipation of energy. It's a dissipation of energy. If life is not dissipating any kind of energy at all, you have non-life. So you take this biosphere, and then, wow, you have Hiroshima being exploded. That's right. That's what I'm going at. Now you see where I'm going with this. The biosphere, the Earth, is doing this because we're an extension of the Earth. We are the Earth. So the Earth has the atom bomb explode and destroy Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Oh, well, why would it do that? To create new sense of order, creating a new kind of geopolitical order. And I know this for a fact because I've researched it. Scientists, like, Leo Zeltzer, he was like, don't drop the bomb. We don't have to. We could scare the enemy into submission. And like, I think he had a list, like, he got enough scientists to sign, in favor of not using the bomb, but just showing it to the enemy that we can knock you to, we can send you to kingdom come if you don't, follow if you don't go to, if you don't come to the table, and and so, like, and Washington didn't want to do that. Washington, the president, Harry Truman, didn't listen to reason. So, like, some scientists were like, look, the ones involved in creating this thing, the very brains who I think collectively had a higher IQ than the people who are the politicians running the country. That's a whole other theory I want to get into about IQ and how it affects our behavior. Like, these people they had the intelligence to create this monster of a bomb, but they also had enough intelligence to, like, well, let's not necessarily blow our wad. Let's just, like, show the rest of the world that we have this monster. Now Truman's shrewd, so he was like, no, we have to drop this thing, and so this is why. Now think about it in terms of this. I'm talking about the biosphere, and I'm talking about what life does. Life dissipates energy. Because entropy is all about that. Entropy, in a previous video, I discussed how this cosmologist and or physicist said that with the growing entropy of the universe, it created life, including our galaxies and us and life. So, and he used the idea of like the waterfall, and so as the water hits like these protruding rocks, the spray of water, that's us. Right? The releasing of energy to create new forms or systems of order. So it's a dissipation of order to create new order. That's what all this is. That's what all of this is, including the whole thing about the hormones, because all the hormones, animals, insects, and plants use hormones for life. You cannot have life without the hormones. It wouldn't work. I don't know about bacteria or viruses, but you're eating, yeah, having sex, yeah, even plants have hormones, and insects. So that's when I say life, I'm talking about a lot of life, if not all of it, a big chunk of it, right? So life has to have these hormones. So it all ties in, and the whole thing about drive, like if you don't have hormones, you don't have the drive to survive, and so that's why I try to tie addiction with drive. And that I think that there's a fine line between addiction and drive. And I even talk about how certain dictators, they must be addicts. And they're, John Lennon said it about politicians and our governments. He said that the world is being run by maniacs for maniacal reasons. And that the ironic thing about it is I could be, considered a maniac for saying these things and be held into account for the whole thing is maniacal. John Lennon was saying that. So it's run by maniacs. Well, let's break it down into the whole thing about the hormones. Probably because some of these people who are running the world like maniacs and who are maniacs for maniacal purposes is because they are addicted. Why? Because they have an extreme high percentage of drive. They are driven. They are driven. They used to say, the whole story about Donald Trump, he's up before everybody. He's always up. Now, I don't know about his personal life, but he must be addicted to something. Think about it. And Nixon, there's a story about Nixon that I have to talk about some other day, is how he fudged the Vietnam peace talks. Like he had access to things even before he was president. He was a professional politician, so like he was able to and people knew that he was running. It's like, hey, so he somehow reached out to the peace talks to people, over there in France. You have like Ho Chi Minh, and you have you got like South Vietnam, North Vietnam, and France and all that. Everybody's involved there. It's like, hey, so I think he reached out to Vietnam, the communist part of Vietnam. Hey, don't do this. I'm going to be president. He reached out to somebody over there. Like there was I don't know the details, but there was a potential cessation of the Vietnam War long before it was actually, long before it ended. So like 6 years. Like it took 6, so like he became president like in '69, and so around that time he said, like, if I become president, like I'll really I'll make this war like history, and you'll get a lot more than what the peace talks are going to give you, because if you do the peace talks and you stop war now, you're going to be ripped off. You're not going to get what you deserve. So somehow that sabotaged the peace talks in '69. So the Vietnam War continued until 1975. Think about that. Because why? Come on, people. Because he was addicted. He had a drive. But so that's why I think addiction is there's a fine line between the purpose of life, which is a drive to live, and being addicted to something. Because I want to live. But am I so addicted that I want to kill somebody to live? Let me rule. I want a kingdom. If anything, I want to be if you want a kingdom, I want to be the Diogenes of your kingdom. So he had a drive, and CEOs. Who would increase the cost of living, and for what, and I looked at this concept of elite overproduction, what's going on there. It has to time with addiction, especially with the Epstein files, and that's the whole sex trade, right? These leaders and these CEOs and these bankers and these politicians, they're on the Epstein file list, and everyone's like, release the Epstein file, release the Epstein file. And chances are that's a real problem, because a lot of people are probably on that freaking list. And so you have you take this demented look at Fantasy Island. That became the pedo island of freaking Jeffrey Epstein. That's like imagine him in a white suit. You have like little Hi, welcome to Fantasy Island. It's Epstein, and exactly, and like they would have like sex with underage victims. Why? Because of this. You're addicted. They are addicted. They are addicted, and it turns out the very same hormones are activated when you're addicted to drugs as you are when you're addicted to sex. It's the same ones. So you've been hijacked. And so the drive of life is more than just that. It's an addiction to get that pleasure, stimulation. And remember the rat experiment. The rats would have a device attached to their brain that would activate their pleasure section. Where these hormones are released. And they keep pressing that thing because they're getting off until they die. Well, how about this? You're not doing that to yourself. But what if you're so addicted to your position in life that you're killing other people? So the mouse is like hitting this thing, but his brain is hitting this thing, but the negative effect is to kill all these other living mice. It'd still do it. So you take a mouse, it would still do it. It would kill itself. So like these people, certain people are so addicted to their position in life and power that they're willing to kill a lot of other people, directly or indirectly. And this is a fact. We can look at it historically. The first one that comes to mind is Hitler, and then you have like Stalin and stuff what's going on here? So it's to keep certain people in power. They must be addicted. And so then you have like the small crime versus the big crime. So you have some guy who's a junkie in the street. He's trying to satisfy his hormonal fix, right? And so, but you have somebody who is on that Epstein list. He's doing the same fixing. He's addicted to the same hormonal fix. Same thing. Yeah, big crime versus little crime. And so we're all just distracted looking at the little criminal as opposed to the big ones. Like John Lennon said, this world is run by maniacal people for maniacal means. And I think it's tied in with the addiction. And that life itself is addicting. So we look at the biosphere again, the whole biosphere, and I want to end it with this. So you look at the Earth, and you see it like okay, it's a biosphere, just a biosphere. And then this part of the biosphere, is exploding. Wow, and all these people are being, eviscerated, destroying. Well, because the biosphere is releasing order, dissipating order, to create new order. And that's what happened geopolitically, because like I said, Truman wanted to drop those bombs, and you know why? To get Japan into submission, but to scare the rest of the world, especially the Soviets. That's why he dropped the bomb. To show the Soviets, look. And we already know that it's because of the Soviets that we, in a way, won the Second World War. No, it's because we dropped the bomb. But the Soviets kicked the ass, of the Germans and the Japanese. Look it up. And so it's something that you just can't overlook. And so, like with Russia alone, with Germany alone, like Russia, in I think it was 42. I wasn't there, so like around 1942, like with the battle of I think Stalingrad, it was a bloody mess of a war, and they consider it the turning point. Where, wow, this is like a turning point of the war against Nazism, because of the Russians really, they lost major casualty, but they kicked their ass. Eventually, it's like, wow, well, what happened? Hitler couldn't take it over, and I think in Leningrad back in I think in 45, it was at the end of the war, right? And one of the final thing was I think in Leningrad, they couldn't take Leningrad. Now, look it up, history majors who know more than I do about the details. I'm not into the details anymore. I used to be in the details, but now I call it delve into the details. I want the overall picture to see these bigger panoramic things of what's happening. Like with the biosphere is doing that. And so like Truman's like Russia. So Truman knew like Russia was instrumental for the defeat of the Nazi Party. I really think that with Stalingrad, Leningrad, and then I think also with Japan against Japan. Japan trying to go to China, and the Russians over there too, right? So it's like okay, well, but we're going to drop the atom bomb, and show the world that we're more stronger than Russia. And so it's like this thing about communism versus capitalism and all that. So again, that's all this entropic activity, the dissipation of energy. That's what the biosphere is doing this. So it's like so what I'm trying to say is major forest fires create new life. So why not with these wars? You have these wars to create new life. But here's the thing about it: who's behind? Who's going to push the buttons? Level-minded people who are not at all addicted to anything. Now as I conclude this, look at the people behind, the scenes, or like better yet, do this instead. So who benefits from the destruction of an existing order? Who benefits from the dissipation of an existing order to create this new order? Who is benefiting from it? Okay? And so, remember, we're looking at things across, lanes. I don't stay in my lane. I look at different areas of reference. I mean, the whole biosphere kind of thing, doing all this as opposed to individual people. But let's look at this. So you have you have the World War II, and what happens, with that? You create new order, destroying order to create new order. And so, but now we can zero in now and zoom. Who benefits from this? Creating new order, creating new life, new order, new geopolitical order. Well, you have say, after World War II, you got German industrialists. They have benefited from it. You have financiers, people that handle how you move money. They definitely benefited. Business networks. United States was in a higher position, and they spearheaded all this thing in the West. It's like we're going to create the UN and all this other stuff. And so, and you have the post-war building projects in all these different countries that were directly hit, including Germany. So the people in charge benefit from this. Oh yeah, we have to rebuild. Well, we're financiers. We have to benefit, and industrialists. So that's what's going on. And now you got to remember. So you think about it in other areas where you have destruction, and so the pandemic was a form of destruction. COVID-19, in 2019 it began, right? And that went all the way to 2023 or 2024, right? I think let's just say it was from 2019 to 2023, right? Look it up. So, in 2018, in the United States alone, we had 586 billionaires. Now, come 2024, the number increased to 813. So that's a new addition of 229 billionaires in the United States alone.